Most people today see chestnuts as a festive indulgence, a treat to be enjoyed from a paper cone, a fleeting taste of the holiday season. However, while we view them as a simple snack, a medieval monk saw something far more essential: the bread of the woods, a title that speaks to survival itself. But what exactly did that survival taste like? Our journey today takes us back to a medieval monastery, an experiment in sensory history. We're stripping away all modern conveniences to recreate an ancient technique, using nothing but fire and ash, all to discover the true flavor of this forgotten staple. The result will reveal a forgotten taste and a lost way of life. Before we delve into the medieval world, take a moment to drop a comment below. Have you ever roasted chestnuts over an open fire? Or would this be your first time trying such an age-old method? We always find the stories from viewers who've attempted this fascinating. Section 1. The Monk's World, the Spiritual Corporation. To truly appreciate the significance of this humble nut, we must first understand the monastery itself. These were not merely quiet, rural churches. They were sprawling, self-sufficient communities, essentially spiritual corporations driven by a single, powerful motto from the 6th century rule of Saint Benedict: ora et labora, pray and work. This duality governed every moment of a monk's existence, and it dictated everything they consumed. The modern world is preoccupied with diet fads, but for a medieval monk, diet had nothing to do with health or body image. It was a tool for spiritual discipline. The rules, laid out with meticulous detail in chapters 39 and 40 of Saint Benedict's rule, were designed to starve the ego, to tame the worldly appetites that were seen as barriers to God. So, what was on the menu? The rules were quite specific: 2 meals a day, with 2 cooked dishes at each meal. This wasn't for variety, but rather a practical concession. Saint Benedict wisely noted that if a brother found one dish inedible, he would still have the other to sustain him. A third dish of fruit or vegetables might be added if the harvest was plentiful. The cornerstone of this diet was bread. Each monk received 1 pound per day, but not the light, airy bread of the wealthy. Instead, it was a dense, dark loaf of rye or barley, sustenance in its purest form. But the most well-known rule was the restriction on meat. Chapter 39 states plainly, abstain entirely from eating the meat of 4-footed animals. No beef, no pork, no mutton. Red meats were believed to inflame the passions, making the soul sluggish and unfit for prayer. This rule, however, had loopholes, and medieval monks exploited them with a cleverness born of deprivation. The rules specified 4-footed animals. Fish were permitted, and monasteries built elaborate ponds to ensure a steady supply. But the classification of fish was remarkably flexible. Beavers, with their scaly tails, were sometimes considered aquatic. Puffins were fair game. The theologian Thomas Aquinas even argued that chickens were originally aquatic and therefore qualified as fish. Chicken and duck frequently graced the monastic table. The creativity didn't stop there. Twice-cooked meat, like meatballs or rissoles, somehow didn't count as actual meat and could be eaten in the refectory. Soup made from meat was deemed acceptable by some monasteries. But the reality was often more complex than the rules suggested. By the late Middle Ages, monks in larger, wealthier monasteries had developed so many creative interpretations that the austere diet described by Saint Benedict had become more legend than practice. Meat was regularly eaten outside the refectory, particularly in the abbot's quarters. In smaller, stricter communities, particularly Cistercian houses where discipline remained rigid, the original rules held firm. Meals were eaten in complete silence. The only sound was a designated brother reading from the Bible. Food was fuel for the body. Scripture was food for the soul. Communication was done through a complex system of hand signals, a circle with the thumb and forefinger to ask for bread, for example. Every action was prescribed and imbued with meaning. This austere life was a world away from the feasts of the nobility and the monotonous hunger of the peasantry. The monks occupied a unique space in between. They had no personal wealth, but the monasteries were powerful landowners. They didn't worry about where their next meal was coming from. Vast gardens, orchards, and beehives made them self-sufficient. And crucially, they managed their forests. This is where the humble chestnut enters the monk's world, not as a luxury, but as a pillar of their self-reliant existence. Section 2. The bread of the woods. The chestnut is more than just a nut. For millennia, it was a lifeline. Its story is interwoven with the history of Europe. The European sweet chestnut, Castanea sativa, originated in Asia Minor and Greece. The ancient Greeks revered it, cultivating it as early as 2000 BC. This knowledge stretched back beyond the Middle Ages into the classical world. The Roman writer Pliny traced chestnuts to Sardis in ancient Lydia. He wrote that Roman women, during religious fasts, ground chestnut flour as a bread substitute, the very same technique medieval monks would employ 1,000 years later. The physician Gargilius Martialis documented cooking them in ash or terracotta vessels. The method medieval monks used wasn't an invention, it was an inheritance, a technique passed down through centuries of necessity. It was the Romans who spread the chestnut across their empire. As legions marched, they planted chestnut groves, a living food supply for soldiers. An army marches on its stomach, and chestnuts were a durable, calorie-dense ration. One Greek army of 10,000 men is said to have survived a brutal retreat from Asia Minor in the 4th century BC thanks to their stores of chestnuts. By the Middle Ages, the chestnut was foundational, especially in mountainous regions where grain wouldn't grow. In parts of Italy, France, and Spain, it wasn't just another plant. It was the bread tree, L. a pane, or lauda panna. This nickname wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal description of its function. When dried, chestnuts could be milled into a fine flour, a vital substitute for expensive wheat. For peasant communities, this was their daily bread. It made dense cakes, porridge, and thickened stews. When the grain harvest failed, the chestnut harvest stood between a community and starvation. It was the food of necessity. The numbers tell the story. Chestnut flour contains 75 to 80% carbohydrates, compared to wheat's 60%. It's actually more energy-dense than the grain it replaced. 100 grams provide 365 calories, nearly identical to wheat flour's 364 calories. But chestnuts offered something wheat couldn't: 43 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 g, 72% of daily needs. They contained essential amino acids, high fiber, and were naturally gluten-free. For monks managing vast communities through harsh winters, this wasn't just a substitute. In mountainous regions where wheat failed, it was nutritionally superior. This context is essential. Monks committed to simple living were masters of using every resource. Chestnuts were a reliable food source that required far less labor than grain. The autumn harvest provided a massive influx of calories to be preserved for the lean months of winter. Monks became experts in preservation. The simplest method was drying. Chestnuts spread on straw mats for weeks until hard and shrunken. Some were shelled and gently baked, a process that yielded a product that could be stored for over a year. For long-term storage, monasteries in mountainous regions developed sophisticated drying techniques. In the 7 Venice mountains of France, specialized 2-story buildings called cledes were constructed. A slow fire of chestnut husks burned continuously on the ground floor, while the harvest was spread on the perforated floor above. For 3 to 6 weeks, monks would turn the chestnuts regularly as smoke and gentle heat slowly dehydrated them. These dried chestnuts, hard as stones, could be stored for over a year and rehydrated for stews or ground into that life-sustaining flour. But fresh from the tree, the most direct way to consume a chestnut was to roast it. And for a monk, the method was as simple as the ingredient itself: fire and the ash it leaves behind. This wasn't just cooking. It was a direct interaction with the most fundamental elements of their world. If this historical deep dive is adding value, a quick like helps preserve and share these forgotten techniques with others. Much appreciated. Section 3. The ancient technique. To roast a chestnut like a medieval monk, the modern kitchen must be forgotten. Forget steel ovens and non-stick pans. Transport yourself to a world where the hearth was the heart of the monastery. For much of the Middle Ages, the primary cooking tool was the open hearth. Cooking was done over the flames in cauldrons hung above them or placed directly into the embers and ash. This last method, sub seniors, under the ash, is one of the oldest cooking techniques known to humanity. Archaeological evidence reveals this isn't just a medieval technique. It's one of humanity's oldest cooking methods. Excavations of ancient hearths, some dating back 24,000 years, contain carbonized acorns and other foods roasted in embers. When medieval monks buried chestnuts in ash, they were practicing a culinary art older than agriculture itself. Roman writers described this method, a testament to its ancient roots. It's a technique born of pure efficiency. The science behind it is elegantly simple. The hot embers provide intense heat, but the thick blanket of insulating ash shields the food from direct scorching flame. It creates a pocket of consistent, all-encompassing radiant heat, a primitive oven. It both roasts and steams the nuts simultaneously, creating a tender, moist interior that other methods can't replicate. The temperature range in this ash cocoon is remarkably precise. Direct flame reaches 800 to 1000 degrees Celsius, far too aggressive, burning the exterior while leaving the interior raw. A modern oven provides 200 to 220 degrees Celsius of dry, uniform heat. But the ember and ash combination creates a sweet spot, 180 to 220 degrees Celsius of moist, radiant heat. Hot enough to trigger the Maillard reaction above 140 degrees Celsius, but gentle enough to steam the interior simultaneously. This is why the method produces results impossible to replicate in modern kitchens. But before that, one critical step was essential: scoring the shell. A chestnut is a tiny pressure cooker. As it heats, moisture inside turns to steam. Without an escape route, it will explode. A simple X cut into the shell with a knife is all it takes to release that pressure safely. With the fire burned down to a bed of glowing coals, the stage was set. No special equipment, just an understanding of fire and patience. For a monk whose life was a rhythm of patience and prayer, this was a meditative act, a moment of transformation. Section 4. The experiment. The history lesson transitions to practice. The goal is to replicate the process authentically. No grills, no foil, just wood, fire, and chestnuts. First, the right kind of fire. This requires a deep, long-lasting bed of embers. For that, seasoned hardwood is essential. Oak, beech, or maple burn hot and break down into glowing coals that retain heat for a long time. Soft woods like pine burn too fast and leave a resinous, unpleasant taste. The fire has been burning for several hours. The logs are gone. What remains is the heart of the fire, a landscape of heat, glowing red embers under a thick, insulating blanket of ash. This is the oven. This is the medieval monk's kitchen. Now the chestnuts, fresh, plump, and glossy. As discussed, the most crucial step is scoring them. The tool is simple, a small, sharp knife. An X is cut into the flat side of each nut, through the outer shell and the papery inner skin. This small detail is the difference between a perfect chestnut and a small explosion. With the chestnuts prepared, the process begins. A stick is used to push aside the top layer of ash, exposing the glowing embers. The wave of heat is intense. The chestnuts aren't placed on the brightest coals. That's too aggressive. Instead, they're positioned on the edge of the main coal bed. One by one, they are laid down, scored side up. No crowding. Now the most important part of the technique: burying them. The hot ash is gently pulled back over the chestnuts, covering them completely. Then, some of the glowing embers are pushed over the top of the mound. They are now entombed in a cocoon of heat. And now the wait begins. There's no timer here. This is cooking by feel, by experience. Historical accounts suggest 10 to 15 minutes. It's in this moment the connection to the past is felt. A monk finished with prayers, coming to the hearth to prepare this simple warming food. The air thick with the smell of the fire, the only sound, the quiet hiss and crackle of embers. This was a singular focused activity, a physical manifestation of ora et labora. While the chestnuts roasted, perhaps psalms were recited from memory. It's a world away from beeping microwaves. This is slow food in its most original form. The smell is already incredible. Not just burning wood, but a deeper, toasty aroma. Section 5. The reveal and tasting. The time has come. It's been about 12 minutes. The smell is rich, nutty, almost sweet, mixed with wood smoke. This is the moment of truth. Using the stick, the mound is carefully excavated. It's like an archaeological dig for flavor. There they are, transformed. The shells are no longer glossy brown, but a deep matte black coated in fine gray dust. They look prehistoric. They are incredibly hot. They're pulled out onto a wooden board. There's a quiet hissing sound. The X on the shells is peeled back, revealing the golden meat inside, steaming in the cool air. The aroma is intoxicating, deeply smoky, but also sweet and toasty. It smells nothing like a modern oven. This smells wilder, earthier. After they cool just enough to handle, it's time to peel one. The heat and steam have done their job. The blackened outer shell cracks and falls away. The papery inner skin, normally so difficult to remove, is fused to the shell and comes off with it. What's left is a perfectly intact, beautifully cooked chestnut. Pale gold, soft to the touch. Now, the tasting moment arrives. The first bite is remarkable. The first thing noticed is the smoke. It's not a hint. It's a defining characteristic, but it's a clean, sweet wood's flavor that permeates the entire nut. The taste includes chemical compounds like guaiacol and syringol from the burning hardwood, seasoning the nut with the essence of the fire. Beneath the smoke is an intense, concentrated sweetness. The slow, even heat of the ash has caramelized the natural sugars, creating deep, toasty notes impossible to get from the dry heat of an oven. The flavor is profoundly more complex. The science behind this flavor transformation is fascinating. When chestnuts reach temperatures above 140 degrees Celsius under the ash, a chemical reaction called the Maillard reaction begins. Amino acids in the chestnut's proteins react with natural sugars, creating hundreds of new flavor compounds, pyrazines that give that distinctive nutty aroma, furans responsible for caramel notes, and aldehydes contributing malty sweetness. This is pure medieval chemistry happening without any knowledge of the science behind it. Two distinct chemical processes work simultaneously: the Maillard reaction between proteins and sugars and caramelization of the chestnut's natural sugars. Together, they create layers of flavor impossible to achieve through modern oven roasting, which provides dry heat but lacks the moisture retention and smoke compounds of ash roasting. And the texture is incredible. An oven-roasted chestnut can be dry, crumbly. This is wonderfully soft, almost creamy. Being buried in ash has steamed it in its own moisture. It almost melts in the mouth. A medieval monk tasting this would have no modern reference points, no comparison to oven roasting, no knowledge of chemical reactions. What he would taste is the essence of ora et labora, made tangible. The smoke is the wood he chopped. The sweetness is God's provision from the autumn harvest. The warmth is the fire he tended during hours of silent prayer. This wasn't just food. It was communion with the rhythm of monastic life, prayer, work, and sustenance, inseparable. To a monk, this flavor didn't need scientific explanation. It was simply the taste of sufficiency, of having enough, which was all the rule of Saint Benedict promised. To compare this to a modern oven-roasted chestnut is like comparing a sun-ripened garden tomato to a pale, flavorless one from a supermarket. They are technically the same thing, but the experience is worlds apart. This tastes elemental. It tastes of fire, of wood, of the earth. This is a flavor lost to time. This is what the bread of the woods actually tastes like. Section 6. Food for thought. Tasting this is an act of historical empathy. There is a direct connection with the sensory world of the past. This is the flavor of austerity, the taste of a diet stripped of all pretense. There is no salt, no butter. The only seasoning is the fire itself. For a monk, this unadorned flavor was a constant reminder of his vow of simplicity. And yet, one can imagine that on a cold day in a drafty monastery, a handful of these hot, Smoky chestnuts felt like a profound comfort, a small parcel of warmth and sweetness in a world of strict rules. Picture the meal: a wooden bowl of pottage, a hunk of dark rye bread, a cup of watered-down wine, and beside it, a small pile of these ash-roasted chestnuts, their smoky scent in the air, eaten on their own or crumbled into the stew to add substance and a sweet, smoky depth. They provided calories, protein, and a touch of sweetness to an otherwise humble meal. Remarkably, this tradition hasn't disappeared. It's simply transformed. In just a few weeks, millions will gather for Thanksgiving, and many tables will feature roasted chestnuts, often without knowing they're continuing a practice over 1,000 years old. The famous carol, "Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire," echoes this medieval technique, though most now use ovens instead of embers. For those inspired to try this method, chestnuts are in season right now, readily available through early winter. Beyond simple roasting, they bridge beautifully into modern cuisine. Chestnut stuffing for Thanksgiving turkey, a natural pairing, as medieval monks discovered with roasted fowl. Chestnut soup, creamy and rich, elevated with a touch of brandy, pureed into a side dish with butter and herbs. Even desserts, chestnut flour in cakes, or candied chestnuts as a confection. The technique remains accessible, whether using the traditional ash method demonstrated here, roasting in a modern oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes, or even preparing them over a backyard fire pit. The fundamental principle holds: score the shell, apply heat, and patience. The flavor won't match the smoky complexity of the medieval method, but the connection to history remains. This experiment began with one question: what happens when chestnuts are roasted like medieval monks did? What happens is a forgotten flavor is unlocked. Intensely smoky, surprisingly sweet, wonderfully tender. But more than that, there's an understanding that the bread of the woods wasn't just a nickname. It was a testament to a food that was a pillar of survival. This simple act reveals a worldview that valued simplicity, used every resource, and found profound satisfaction in the most basic elements of the natural world. If unearthing these forgotten flavors of the past resonates, consider subscribing to join this community and let us know in the comments what other historical foods or ancient cooking techniques spark curiosity. Every suggestion is read. So the next time you see a chestnut, remember its deep and ancient history. Remember its role as the bread of the woods, a humble food that sustained monks and peasants for thousands of years. Thanks for joining us on this taste of the past. Stay curious. Stay curious.